Good afternoon and welcome to the RES Edge webinar. Today, our special guest is Nick Lawrence. So on your screen, you can see it is time to grab your early bird ticket now for the Meet the Moment, Prove It RES Annual Conference. We will be located in Chicago on October 21st, 22nd, and 23rd. We have an amazing agenda coming up for you with guests you won't believe, and we'll be publishing that on Monday of next week. Look for that on your LinkedIn posts and in your email. Also, our Edge sessions continue next month with Pat Riley from Metadata. Pat Riley will be talking on competency certifications and scoring rubrics. That's something that we all have to do, and sometimes it's just a pain in the butt. So Pat's going to make it a whole lot easier on everybody. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to my friend from the Enablement Squad, Michelle Curtis.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Curtis, and I'm on the Enablement Squad events team at the Enablement Squad. We are a vibrant community of over 4,000 enablement professionals dedicated to advancing the practice of revenue and sales enablement. Our mission is to connect, empower, elevate, and just help out our enablement practitioners by helping provide a platform for sharing insights, best practices, and different innovative strategies. We have tons of events that go on, including our webinars, like this one that we've partnered with RES on. We also do hackathons, and we bring experts together to explore latest trends, tackle common challenges, foster collaboration. I believe that we're dropping a link to the Enablement Squad in the chat. So if you aren't already a part of the squad, definitely join our community. We would love to have you. So our guest speaker today is someone many of you likely already follow on LinkedIn. We're going to drop his profile link in the chat there. If you don't follow him already, you're absolutely missing out. I can say personally, I've gained a wealth of experience and insights from his posts, and I cannot recommend following him enough. So we are absolutely thrilled to welcome Nick Lawrence, who is currently the manager of global sales enablement at Databricks. And he has years of experience in the enablement field, as well as a bronze level Kirkpatrick certification. Nick brings a wealth of and depth of knowledge that I know you're going to find invaluable. So Nick, we're so excited to have you. We're really excited to hear your insights. So I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you. Wow, quite the introduction. I'm excited to meet me after such a nice intro. Thank you. I'm happy that if for anybody that follows me and they gain any insights, I'm always happy to hear that. I've for whatever reason I started a couple years ago doing that, just posting consistently, and I love all things enablement. I love the community, and I love being able to give back and help everybody here. And that's what we're trying to do here with RES and the Enablement Squad. So thank you for having me. Before my intros here, I wanted to start off with a question, right, that you can throw your answer into the chat. The question I'm going to ask is, what percentage of L&D teams do you think make it all the way up to evaluating at level 4 results? So go ahead and start putting in your chats there. I start seeing them come in right now. If you're not familiar with the Kirkpatrick model or the levels, so we have obviously level 1 is going to be reaction, level 2 learning, level 3 behavior, and then level 4 results, meaning our training and enablement initiatives are impacting business results. So Michelle, I'm going to turn it over to you, if you don't mind, maybe opening up the chat.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let me read some of these. So I'm seeing a lot of 5%. I'm seeing 0.3%. It's an interesting one. 10%, 35, less than 1%. I've seen a couple of those. Okay. Not very promising, really. 12%.
A pretty big range. I will say, I think I gave away the answer already in the description of the webinar. But yeah, so it seems like most people are in that range or in the right range here. So there have been few research articles out there on this, and most of the estimates float between the 2 to 5% range of L&D teams that actually ever make it all the way up to level 4, evaluating their impact on business results. And I get excited about that for kind of like 2 reasons. The first reason is, well, I tend to be optimistic anyways, but the first reason is, one, it tells us that it's possible. It tells us that people can, in fact, actually get there, right? There are organizations that do it. I've read countless books from independent consultants that show and demonstrate case studies of them doing it. So you can do it. It just takes the right type of approach and strategy. So that's really I think empowering, especially because I think there's like a limited belief in enablement that I've seen circulate in the community, and that belief is that we can only say that we're correlating. We can only say correlation, never causation. And I think that's a limiting belief, because I really do believe that enablement can show causation, that we've caused business results and business outcomes to improve because of our efforts. So that's the first thing I get excited about. The second thing I get excited about is, if you can get there, you're joining just world-class group of people, right? So only 2 to 5% of teams get there. If you are able to do that for your organization, you're going to be so much more valuable, not only to your immediate employer, but also to the market as well. So obviously, if you're joining this webinar, you care about your career and enablement. And if you can get to a place where you can reliably show behavior change and business results by the programs that you put in place, you're going to be a lot more, obviously, add a ton of value, to yourself there. And that's really the goal of this webinar here. Is I'm not going to promise that you're going to be able to do this week or anything like that. This is really meant to kind of set the spark in motion for you, and maybe some direction. I'm going to be citing a ton of resources along the way that I know that they're going to compile in the follow-up and as well too, for you to continue that journey and learning along the way. The first thing I wanted to do really quickly is a disclaimer. I want to protect myself here. I'm not affiliated with Kirkpatrick Partners at all. As Michelle mentioned, I did get certified, but I cannot share much of the details that I learned in the certification, because that's intellectual property. Anything that I'm going to be sharing regarding Kirkpatrick is kind of public knowledge, things that you can find on the internet, things that are listed out in their book that they published and whatnot like that. But just a quick little disclaimer there: all the rights to the model and everything, all things Kirkpatrick is owned by the Kirkpatrick partners. Now, if you're familiar with the Kirkpatrick model, you have likely seen it represented by this pyramid. And while the pyramid is nice, it's simple, right? But the problem, the benefit of the model is that it can be simply communicated as this pyramid. The problem is that it's so simple that a lot of misconceptions and misuse happen because of the model. So if you're not familiar with it, we have level 1 reaction all the way at the bottom. After that, level 2 learning, level 3 behavior, and level 4 results. And the misconceptions, some of the main misconceptions here is level 1 is reaction. It's the biggest, it's the base of the pyramid. That must be the most important. That must mean that's where we should be starting. That's probably one of the biggest misconceptions. We always want to be starting with the results and working our way backwards from there. And another big misconception, which I think prohibits so many teams from working up the levels, is the kind of the assumption that they all nicely stack on top of each other, one after another, right? So if they react favorably to the training, they will learn something. And if they learn something, they will do something. And if they do something, they'll achieve something. So it kind of presents that kind of that assumption, I guess, or that's what it's trying to kind of convey. And the main takeaway there is it's obviously not that easy, right? Just because somebody likes a training doesn't mean they're going to learn something. Just because they learn doesn't mean they're going to do anything. And so that's kind of the main thing. In fact, there's enough research that shows, and I'll dive into this, but in fact, it's that those are incorrect. Some of those are incorrect assumptions as well. So something that I'll get into. Now, the Kirkpatrick partners would also say the same exact thing. They would say this is not what the Kirkpatrick model is. They would say it looks more like this, right? So this is from the book. If you have the book, you've probably seen this image, or you could look it up online as well. So the Kirkpatrick partners would say, no, it's not a pyramid at all. It's the system here. So this is how they present it, the New World Kirkpatrick model, and this is obviously, to me, a lot better than the pyramid for a couple of reasons. One, it gives you a little bit more context, a little bit more, it includes some components to be evaluating and focusing on at each level. And one of the best things it probably does is that middle piece too, with what's surrounding level 3 behaviors. We're going to be talking a little bit, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but what Kirkpatrick got right was acknowledging that there is no training by itself it can move the needle, can achieve the results for you. They are really dependent upon that system you build around the behaviors to make sure that the behaviors are being applied consistently and reliably over time, something that they refer to as required drivers. So those are the support and accountability components that you wrap those behaviors around. And then you have obviously the level 4 results kind of broken up between like outcomes and indicators as well. So again, definitely a lot better than the pyramid, but from a practitioner standpoint, it's still not that easy. and I think that's probably true, or potentially a reason why only 2 to 5% of teams ever get to level 4. There's still some, so one of the things I'm going to do over the next 40 minutes or so is talk about maybe some of the gaps in the model, or maybe some things that maybe aren't as explicitly called out. And also what I really want to be focusing on is bridging the gaps, or the missing links that really connect level 2 to level 3 and level 3 to level 4. So those are the two things I want to be focusing on here, and what I'm going to be doing over the next couple of slides here is at each stage kind of providing a little bit more context, filling in some gaps where needed, and really diving in and helping you understand what those missing links are to make sure that you can in fact bridge the gaps. All right. You know what? Let me go back here and pause for a second, because I think I saw some chats coming in. Elizabeth or Michelle, any questions or things that got brought up that we should address?
Oh, you're a very popular guy. Absolutely. Give me just a second to pull them up. So we have.
If not, we could keep going.
Give me a second. For some reason, my chat is not coming up. There we go. So we have, where is the 2 to 5% stat from?
Okay.
If you can tell us.
Sure. So that came from a couple different places, and I will I can send them along as well, any of the resources. So the LinkedIn's annual learning report, LinkedIn learning report, they had it at about 5%. And then I believe the others came from like ATD. And then there's a couple other like expert opinions that rank it closer to like the 2%. But great question. And any of the stats that I drop in, I can also include in the follow-up there as well.
Yeah, I think you're right about that ATD stat. And then Casey Plank asked, can we share the link to the certification program you went through? And Joanna, as well as Michelle, were kind enough to throw that in the chat. Mike Kunkel also threw that in the chat. And that is where we are right now. So you are good to go.
Great. Awesome. So let's deconstruct the Kirkpatrick model here, kind of like step by step. So again, one of the things that the Kirkpatrick model does really well is reinforcing the idea that we have to start with the end in mind, and starting off with, of course, like the outcomes that we want to achieve. They take it to a place where that you want to be actually. I don't know if this is still the case, but when I went through the certification, they said every organization only has one level 4 result, and then it gets kind of deconstructed from there. being in enablement, I always just wanted to be focusing on the sales organization and the sales people themselves. So what I tend to focus on, and I think like an easy way to kind of get like started on this is kind of deconstructing things based upon like the main goal that sales reps are all trying to achieve, which at the end of the day is they all want to hit quota or surpass quota. And so one of the things that is really important that we do to be able to get to a place that we could say we are causing things to happen, not just correlating, is trying to deconstruct this as much as we can. So what does quota attainment depend on? Well, like if we need a certain amount of bookings at the end of the year, there's a number of bookings I need to book and at an average deal size. If I know those two things, I can calculate what that person ended up attaining at the end of the year. Same thing with like number of bookings. What does that depend on? Well, that depends on the number of deals in your pipeline, win rate, average deal cycle. And then same thing with average deal size. I think that's going to vary a little bit by organization, but you could still try to understand and try to figure out what are the main outcomes that those things depend on. Now, this process of starting with like one outcome and deconstructing it is known as performance logic. And I tend to recommend doing 3 levels deep, starting with like one main outcome or goal and deconstructing it to about 3 levels. Anything more starts to become a little overwhelming. You start having a ton of metrics to kind of like work with. So what are like the main 3 levels that you can start deconstructing? Again, starting out with the main kind of mission of the roles that you're trying to enable. Another thing that Kirkpatrick did really well was focusing on the need to figure out what the leading indicators are. So of those outcomes you identified, what are the things that are going to indicate that they're actually going to be achieved? And so here we have like the second and third line outcomes that we just deconstructed here. Now, for each of those third line outcomes, what are some of the leading indicators that need to take place in order for those things to be achieved? And so an example here, so like number of deals in the pipeline. So one of the first bullet points you see there is like the total engagement among ICP or among like an accounts high with that have a high propensity score for an example. Now, I've been with some more data mature companies. I've been lucky enough to be with more data mature companies where a lot of times they have that data. A lot of times they know what the engagement level is and what maybe the propensity score is. And so that's obviously really useful when you can measure it. But I wouldn't say don't let your current measurement limitations prevent you from doing this exercise, because at the very least, you're able to at least provide more clear expectations for your performers and for the managers of what the field should be performing. What are the accomplishments that they need to focus on that are going to be moving the needle, right? So even if you can't measure these things today, it's still well worth the exercise to try to deconstruct them down and trying to get down to things. So there's still accomplishments, but things that we can now start to really say that we can influence. So a lot of the things you see on here are a lot more closer in our control, in the AE's direct control. So this is now finally where we can get to a place where we can tie our enablement efforts directly to some of those leading indicators, because they're a lot more influenceable, right? So again, just saying number of bookings or win rate, yes, that's tricky to say that we impacted, but if we could further deconstruct that down into the leading indicators, now you're finally at a place where you can reliably say we did impact those things, right? Because they're a lot more easily influenceable or a lot more in your control than some of those other things. So that's the kind of key there is with level 4 results. Still start with like the main outcomes that you want to be focusing on, but deconstruct them down to what you can influence so that you can actually show the causation and not just the correlation. So that is level 4 results. The next thing, so this is where the first kind of like missing link comes into play. Because in the traditional model, we would go directly from level 4 to level 3. And I kind of hold the view where there's no inherent value in behaviors necessarily. It's only when those behaviors produce valuable work. Right. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, you've probably heard me write about the concept of outputs, of focusing on outputs. In other words, what do they need to produce to achieve those desired results, and to what standard? Right. So we've done this deconstruction from outcome, a few levels of the outcomes, identified what are the leading indicators that those outcomes depend on. In order to achieve those things, what needs to be produced and when do they need to be produced? All right. So an exercise you can do to try to identify some of those things after you've already identified the outcomes and the leading indicators is thinking about the major segments of responsibility that a sales rep is, obviously responsible for. So this is just an example of 4 kind of major areas of responsibility. And for each one of those, what are the outputs? What do they produce or deliver on the job? All right. So examples might include a territory plan or an account plan, a pipeline, plan, or a point of view, qualification criteria or a POC, maybe an onboarding plan or a value realization assessment. So again, these are things that if a sales rep were to leave tomorrow, these are things they leave behind the organization. All right. So that's another way of like thinking about them. They are the effects of the behavior essentially. And this is, I think, a really important missing piece from the Kirkpatrick model. And the Kirkpatrick model, they recognize how difficult it is to evaluate level 3 to level 4. I hold a strong opinion that outputs are what can help or enablement teams really bridge that gap, showing that because they went through our programs or because we made these changes, they are now able to produce these outputs to a better standard and achieve those leading indicators and outcomes. So this, I think, is an important concept. So I'm going to pause and ask either Elizabeth and Michelle just to let me know if any important kind of questions or anything like that have stumbled into the chat yet.
We do have a couple of comments. We have Sharon, who is asking, when did Nick get certified? I know about the certifications, bronze, silver, and gold. They were updated.
So when did I get certified?
Yeah.
I'll have to remember. I think it was 2019, I want to say.
Okay, they do still offer the bronze, silver, and gold courses, but I do know that they were updated. So I'm not sure exactly what was meant by that.
Okay.
Mike Kunkel was kind enough to drop into the chat the formula for sales velocity. I don't know if he has an additional comment. And
No,
then JD, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I love that's no surprise that Mike is dropping that in. I love that equation too. And a lot of so if you're not sure where to start, that equation of sales velocity is, those components that make it up are absolutely a great place to try to focus your efforts and start deconstructing what are the indicators that those depend on. And in order to achieve those indicators, what do they need to produce? So all great stuff there for sure.
Thanks for participating, Mike. And then
Yeah.
JD O'Keefe, thank you for participating. And JD said, how deep do you go into these outputs? Example, outputs per sales stage. And actually that is my question as well, is how deep is too deep? Because we don't want to live in the weeds. So what's the right amount?
It's a great question. I will say whatever are the most like valuable outputs. So obviously you could producing a Salesforce report, right? That's technically, I guess, it would meet the definitions of what an output is, but is it really going to move the needle? And so getting with the right stakeholders to identify what are those key outputs. And it really depends on the area of responsibility that you're focusing on. There are some areas of responsibility that might only have a couple outputs. There are others that might have 15. But I think again, the outputs are really important to focus on, because the alternative, trying to focus on competencies or behaviors, that's where the list, to me, becomes super overwhelming. Like if I were to list out the behaviors that sales reps need to do, or the skills they might need to have, that's where my personal opinion, I think the list of that and trying to manage that and measure all of those becomes really overwhelming. I think by focusing on the outputs and the key, most valuable ones to be anchoring your efforts to, can really like help simplify things.
So if I'm understanding, we're going to focus on the outputs and get those from our key leadership. And what we know is that the ones that we can link to a clear behavior are the ones that we are most likely to influence. Is that correct?
The ones that are most the ones that are most linked to those leading indicators and outcomes. So that however dependent those leading indicators are on certain outputs, work outputs that need to be produced, though that's how you kind of want to be focusing on which ones are the most valuable. And again, defining what the standard is as well. So if I have a certain KPI I need to hit, this is the output I need to create, or be produced, but it also needs to be produced to a certain standard to ensure that those KPIs are actually like hit. So you're still kind of working backwards to derive and identify which outputs you want to be focusing on.
Perfect. Now we have a follow-up question from Sharon, and Sharon, thank you again for participating. Sharon wants to know about those standards and those outputs. Do you create these outputs as SMART business goals? Do you put in dates and deliverables for the stakeholders to sign off on? Does that usually lead you to the level 4 results? Do you agree with that sort of pathway?
Yeah, you can. I mean, as long as they're tied to and associated to those leading indicators, those KPIs, the standards are basically meant to answer the question, what does good look like? So if the territory plan, I'll go back to that one example of one of the things that number of deals in your pipeline depends on the engagement level among high propensity buyers, right? So that is something where, like, if we have higher engagement among higher propensity buyers, those are the ones that are most likely to convert, and we'll have more pipeline. We'll have more deals in our pipeline. So when we're building a territory plan, we're setting those standards. We're not just saying build a territory plan. The standard is you're prioritizing your accounts based on the propensity model, or based on that propensity score. So that's an example of setting up, like defining the standard so that those leading indicators actually get defined. So making sure that you're doing the right, there's just making sure that you're associating the right leading indicators to those outputs, so that will help you define, okay, in order for these outcomes and indicators to take place, this output needs to be produced how, or in what way, and whatnot. So it's a way to try to define basically what does good look like, and what do those leading indicators basically like depend on.
Thanks. We are ready to move on, Nick.
Cool. Awesome. I knew that would probably be a topic for a lot of discussion there. So the next thing here is, now we're finally going to get into behaviors. And if you remember from that one model, or from that one New World Kirkpatrick model, around the behaviors, they had required drivers. So those are the support and accountability components that you build in your environment to make sure that those behaviors actually get adopted and are taking place consistently. once again, Kirkpatrick was spot on to say that there's no training by itself can achieve level 4. The success of any program depends on its required drivers. I have instead of support and accountability components, I've kind of broken it up between the environment and the individual. And the reason I did that is, again, I think the required drivers are awesome. I think they're good. Sometimes I feel that they can sometimes be either too simple or maybe not help you diagnose what support and accountability components are actually needed for those behaviors. And so the model I prefer to leverage is Tom Gilbert's behavior engineering model, which focuses on these like 6 boxes essentially of factors that influence behavior. And one of the things you'll notice is Tom Gilbert estimated originally, which has thus been kind of validated by some research, when we're talking about what factors impact performance the most, about 75% he estimated were in those environmental factors. So do they have information like the clear expectations and feedback? Do they have the resources, and is the process designed correctly? Do they have the tools, and are proper incentives and consequences in place as well? So those are the types of things that 75% or more of performance really kind of like depends on. And so I've preferred Tom Gilbert's model here just because it's almost like a diagnostic tool. When you get a request for enablement, you can kind of walk through each one of these bullet points in order from the top down to try to understand what gaps are actually missing. And not only does that going to help you identify the right problems to solve with the right solution, it also addresses another misconception that the Kirkpatrick model is only an evaluation method for training. It's not the case, right? So if training is needed, yeah, we can include that in our assessment. But if the change is something in like in the information or resources box, and if you make those changes, which improves their ability to produce better outputs and accomplish those leading indicators, that's an opportunity for you to assess and evaluate your impact on the business. So the Kirkpatrick model isn't reserved for only learning and training. It could be used for any type of performance improvement initiatives. So that's another kind of like misconception, is like the Kirkpatrick model should or can only be used for training. Any improvement you make to the system can be evaluated. Now, just one of the things I wanted to like add there, if I were to redraw the New World Kirkpatrick model myself, I personally would put the output at the center, and then I would wrap it around with some of those key factors that influence performance, making sure that all of those components are accounted for are in place, because they're obviously all important. I think some are a little bit higher leverage than others, right? So for an example, it's a lot easier to make an impact by adjusting and fixing a process, setting clear expectations and providing resources than it would be to like only try to focus on knowledge and skills in order to perform or improve performance. Now, all of them are obviously important, but they're kind of weighted, I guess, or they all come with kind of like different leverage points, essentially, if that makes sense. Elizabeth, I see a bunch of I see a bunch of chats coming in. Anything standing out here?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in. We have a lot of comments here, so I'll just read them out here. Christina says, some metrics aren't just hygiene data. You don't necessarily try to change every single metric. For example, when baking cookies, I'm trying to make them really tasty. I'm not necessarily measuring level of burned, but I'm tracking it as a leading indicator of tastiness. That's a really good analogy, actually.
Yeah, the output is a tasty cookie. So however you did that, I don't think it's as important necessarily as long as you're producing delicious cookies.
Let's see. Terry says, I'm so glad you mentioned Tom Gilbert's BEM. It's the single most important factor to create results in sales enablement. Let's see. Mahalia
Yeah,
says,
I'll pause there just because I just want
yeah,
to
go for it.
kind of echo that comment. Yeah, if anybody's interested in that, read the book Human Competence. It's where you'll find the behavior engineering model. And it is also where your thoughts on enablement are likely to be flipped on its head.
Yeah, and actually, thank you so much to Mike for throwing that in the chat. A link to that book, so it's there
Okay.
if you're interested. Mahalia says that's why I sought out a job with the title performance consultant, so I could consult holistically.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love that too. The holistic idea is important too. It's the same analogy as like you go into a doctor office. And you go into a doctor office like and you say, hey, I need some pills. I need some pain pills.
Mm,
Like a kind of a bad doctor would say, okay, like which kind would you like, or whatever, or just hand you the prescription. You know, a good doctor would start asking questions, right? Maybe
yeah.
what your job is like, or what your sleeping arrangements are, and stuff like that. And maybe the solution is a new mattress, you know. So it's like and something else, but yeah, it's important to be thinking holistically and trying to understand what the actual cause is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Let's see. Nick, you put me onto this book almost a year ago, and it's changed how I view enablement and performance. So really echoing what you just said, turning enablement upside down on its head.
Cool.
And then there's just some back and forth. Let's see. Agree, Nick. It's a great change management tool too. And a lot of people seem to want to steal all of this stuff you're sharing. So that's good too, stealing that. I see that comment there. Let's see. Terry also says that he ran a training sales company for 15 years and eventually got frustrated that my sales training wasn't changing behaviors and creating results for my clients. It wasn't until I ran into the BEM that I really started to see those changes with clients.
Awesome. Yeah, love to hear that. Love to hear the adoption of the behavior engineering model. It's obviously it's great to see. And it's going to be and again, like focusing in on those environmental factors. The more enablement can do that, I promise, the more you're going to have a bigger, the more you're going to be able to impact performance, because the environment is such a big piece of it. So Tom Gilbert estimated 75% is dependent on the environment. Oh shoot, I'm blanking on his name. Shoot. I'm bummed I'm blanking on his name. But he wrote the book Learning Transfer at Work. If anybody in the chat knows, yeah, throw it in there. But he estimates it 80%. I think Gary Rumler said it was 90%. Edward Demings said it was 96%. The environment only 4%. So the general idea there and the general consensus is the environment in which they work is so critical and so important for performance.
Oh, there you go. It's Paul Matthews.
Paul Matthews. Yes. Sorry, Paul. So moving on here, this is the second missing link to the Kirkpatrick model. Is before we introduce or talk about learning, we want to be talking about competence. And maybe it's not as much of a missing link as more of a direct call out, because I will say the Kirkpatrick model does talk about, does include this in the certification, but doesn't necessarily call it out as explicitly. But similar to my comment about behaviors, is like there's no inherent value in behavior. It's what gets produced. It's the valuable things that get the valuable work that gets produced that provides value. And a kind of similar sentiment can be said about knowledge. There's no inherent knowledge, or there's no inherent value about knowledge. Right? Knowledge only becomes valuable when it is applied. Right. And so the idea here is you want to be assessing kind of two levels of competence. The first level is decision-making competence. So can they apply their knowledge to make the kinds of decisions they need to make on the job, obviously to then perform tasks and produce outputs. And then the second level of competence is task competence. Can they perform tasks, the tasks they need to perform on the job? And a way in which you can start assessing this and really like facilitating this, another model for you, sorry for the model overload here, is Michael Allen's CCAF model. So another book recommendation is Michael Allen's Guide to E-Learning. It's a great book. Another similar book is Kathy Moore's Map It. That's another great book to really try to elevate beyond just information and knowledge transfer to knowledge application. Can they make decisions and perform tasks? And the way in which you have to do that, as you can kind of see by the model, is you have to put them in realistic, relevant situations, give them a reason to act like a challenge, and then there's an activity involved where they actually have to make decisions. They actually have to perform tasks, and after they do that, they get feedback, and not feedback correct, incorrect, but feedback in the form of natural consequences. Right. So if you were to do this or make this decision on the job, or if you were able to perform the task in this way, the natural consequence is likely this. So simulating what that is, and there's a huge body of research that shows that is where learning happens. Learning isn't taking place in the information transfer portion of a training. It is happening in the application and the feedback components of a training. And the more we can demonstrate and assess, are they competent? Can they apply this knowledge? You're much more likely to bridge that gap from level 2 learning over to level 3 behaviors. So competence is the second missing link there. I think I saw some chats come in. Michelle, any questions or anything noteworthy?
I'm back for you here. I'm sorry to confuse you, Nick, but it's Elizabeth. I'm back.
Oh, hi.
JD asked, can you provide a CCAF example for, say, a training on a discovery skill like gap analysis?
Yeah, sure. Let's see. So we'll start with the decision-making competence. We'll start with the decision-making one first. And again, if the examples here, Kathy Moore, I think both of those books I referenced are good. If you go to Kathy Moore's website, she has examples. She actually has like scenario examples for you to start like poking around with. But like an example with like, can you apply your knowledge to make the right decision? So if you're doing a discovery, the scenario in which you can give them is like, hey, you understand this about their current state. This is what you've uncovered about their current state. This is what you've identified about their desired state, right? Now you have to select. So based upon the capabilities, the required capabilities to go from current state to desired state, map the appropriate capabilities that we can provide that solves their problem. All right, so that is a decision I have. It could be an example of a decision I have to make. I have to make a decision about what capabilities are most relevant to this scenario. So I have to apply my knowledge about the customer's situation and my product knowledge in order to do that. So that's an example. To take it a step further, the tasks they need to perform on the job. So you might decide what capabilities are important, but now I actually have to position them. And so maybe now you have to create a scenario or a situation in which they're asking the customer questions about the importance of those capabilities that you provide, right? Also known in command of the message world as like trap setting questions, right? So you're trying to hone in on your unique differentiators and box out the competition. And then so the task there is now you're going to be asking them questions about the importance of our unique capabilities to try to box out the competition. So that's just a small example there, to help you identify those situations. Again, going backwards, starting off with the outputs. What output are we asking them to produce here at the end of this training, right? There might be more than one, but whatever the output is, okay, now you can start thinking about under what conditions do they produce that output? When do they do this? Where do they do it? Who do they do it with? Right? So you're trying to capture that context. And then obviously for the behaviors, like, okay, in order to produce that output, what are the what do they actually have to do? And once again, when do they do it? Who do they do it with? So you're getting that those details up front in your in your analysis. So like after you get these requests come in, and then with the detail and with that context, that is going to help you simulate then the situation in which or the activity or the scenario that you're going to be building.
Nick, I'd like to jump back in for just a hot second. Dana Greenfield was kind enough to link to Kathy Moore's blog.
Nice.
Mahalia indicated that Kathy Moore's action mapping blog influenced her career to change into adult learning and performance. So thank you for your participation, Dana and Mahalia. Mike Kunkel made a great comment, which I would love your comments on. Mike mentioned, and thanks for participating, just one caution, I wouldn't write off sales training completely. Sales training fixes sales performance problems when the performance problem is because people don't know what, why, or how to do something. Those problems occur when we apply training to a problem the training won't solve, or when we apply training appropriately but abstractly outside the system designed to change behavior, to foster adoption, and to coach mastery. So your thoughts on that comment?
Couldn't agree more. I have nothing more to add other than make sure you listen to what Mike just said. Yeah, so some of the times I can go maybe a little bit too hard on the environmental, on the focus on the environment side of the things, that it may make it might send the message that training isn't as important. Training, when done right and when it is needed, is one of the most impactful things you can do to improve performance. Right? You just have like exactly what Mike said. When it is the appropriate solution, when it's needed, and when it's done right, you could. It has a tremendous value in improving performance. Yeah. So nothing to disagree with there.
Great. So we're good to go on. Thanks, Nick.
Yep. All right, cool. Let us then continue on with the model here. So now we're finally getting into level 2 learning. And once again, if you remember from the New World Kirkpatrick model, there was like 5 components that they listed out on there. It was, knowledge, skills, attitude, confidence, and commitment, I think are the 5. And these are things that they're recommending that we assess and we evaluate. And again, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with those things. But what it does, what the model does is it basically jumps directly to, did they learn, without much consideration to like helping you figure out, well, like, will they learn? And to Kirkpatrick's defense, they're a training evaluation model. They're not an instructional design model. But one of the things that I think one message I think it sends incorrectly is that like learning is as easy as testing or quizzing if they took it, so like a lot of people just default directly to like level 2 learning. Let's quiz and test them and we'll wipe our hands clean. They learned. And so that kind of like, I think, downplays the complexity of what's actually involved in learning. So another resource for you, another website as well is Will Talheimer's website, worklearning.com. This is a resource here called the Decisive Dozen, another thing that we can send out in the follow-up here after. But I love all of Will's work because he does he puts a lot of effort into reviewing the scientific research on what actually influences learning the most. And he does a lot, and he helps learning practitioners like us kind of make sense of it all. So he compiles all the most important factors essentially. And he's done that here with like the Decisive Dozen. And I think this is like important because again, the Kirkpatrick model asks you to assess, did they learn? But I think it's worth taking a step back and trying to figure out and assess like, well, will they learn? So like, are we using the right methods? And the kind of subtitle under there I have there is prioritizing the methods over the media. So often we prioritize the media like what type of format should we use, or how is this going to look, what bells and whistles do we include, and we skip over on the methods that really matter. And this is just like a small list of things that that really influence the most of whether or not people are going to learn. And also, is it going to transfer as well? So will they learn and will it transfer? Again, I think the environmental piece, like the event, like a training event, one of the things I say a lot is like a training event can only be as effective as the environment it sits within. And that can be kind of validated by some research where this was an ATD study where even when training is customized and targeted, only 20% of participants are changing the behavior. And the reason though for that, the reason why most training's failing or often fails is not necessarily the training itself, but as you can see by this other research here, is 70% or more of that failure, of that transfer failure, is due to the application environment. All right, so either I think a lot of it might be like the fact that like there's a lot of maybe things that they're not including in the design, such as the stuff you see on the left. But then what's happening afterwards, like all the things that Mike was talking about are they supported? Do they have the right type of ongoing coaching that, from their managers and things like that as well. So that a training can only be as good as the environment it sits within. So making sure we're not just assessing and thinking about, did they learn? Because I think that helped. I think people just kind of jump to let's quiz and test them, but really spending some time and trying to think and answer these questions. Will they learn? And is this actually going to transfer over to the job? Once again, Elizabeth or Michelle, I saw some chats rolling in, so I'll pause.
Yep. So let's see. The 5 moments of need, we did post the link in the chat there. So if you're interested in taking a look at that, that's over there. Bob Moser is such a pro, says Sharon. And let's see, Mike makes a point here. The thing I like about the K4 levels or Phillips 5 is the progressive data through the levels can help you diagnose where the breakdowns occurred when you don't move the needle. If you aren't tracking along the way, it's much harder on the other side to go back and get the data to figure out where the train ran off the tracks.
Awesome. Yeah, couldn't agree more. We should have had Mike as the co-presenter here.
I know, right?
With all of the insights he's dropping. Thank you, Mike. No surprise, he's contributing.
And on a humorous level, you train for sport or train animals, but you do not train people. People learn. But that's just L&D humor. Right. Thank you, Sharon, for that. And then just a question from Lauren. How do you recommend approaching L3 and L4 metrics organizationally? Nick, do you have a data analyst on your team, for instance, or do you pair closely with RevOps? How does that work?
Yeah, it's something that I think we're like still in the early stages of working out, like honestly, but like I think the way in which you approach level 4 is by building. I think it's Gary Rumler in the book Improving Performance, he talks about building a measurement system. And one of the things that I've noticed across a lot of teams and organizations is they have like a dashboard like a dashboard sprawl. They have like so many different dashboards. And so I think by working together with the right stakeholders and building one performance dashboard that your enablement team works off of, right? So you get an agreement from your stakeholders, right? From your business leaders, sales leaders, and you say, these are the outcomes we want to focus on. And if they're anything like, what Mike mentioned, the sales velocity stuff, or the stuff that I was showing you, if it's anything similar to that, they're likely going to give you the buy-in. And so working with the right data teams to build that dashboard, for you, and at the very least, getting with the outcomes and those leading indicators on one dashboard is so important. The level 3 behaviors is tricky, and I don't think it's as, I don't want to say it's not as important, but it's not as important until you're measuring level 4. And even mechanisms for evaluating and measuring the outputs, right? The bridge, the effects of the behavior. Because again, you technically could be measuring somebody performing behaviors or validating they have skills, and they're still not accomplishing what you want them to accomplish. Like that's foreseeable, that is possible. And so so by really focusing on the outcomes and the outputs, and again, not every output is going to be as easily measurable as possible. But the good thing about outputs is they're at least tangible, right? They're usually things that I can look at, right? It's either like it's like a noun or a transaction that I can look at and I can assess, and I can look and we can kind of evaluate whether or not they're being performed to those standards, or whether the managers can be assessing those as well. So I focus primarily, at least for the time being, less on the behaviors and trying to first figure out the outcomes and the outputs.
Nick, I'm just going to interrupt for 1 second because we are, believe it or not, at time. This went really fast. So for those of you who can stay, Nick, if you're comfortable with continuing so that we can get the rest of your knowledge in our brains, we would love to do that. And for those of you who have to drop, we will have this recording available. So don't worry, you're not going to miss anything. We'll make sure the recordings get over to you.
Yeah, I could wrap up here. I'll try to wrap up here quickly, especially because with level 1 reaction, I think this is what part is important. So if you're leaving, just refer back to this part, because or in the recording, because this is, I think, the most damage, or a cause of the most damaging misconception, and that is that they need to like it to learn it. And it's actually not the case. There's been some research. At the very least, there's no correlation between reaction data and learning outcomes or performance outcomes. Some studies, like this one, shows that there's actually could be a negative correlation between level 1 and level 3. And the reason for that is kind of easy once you understand some of the main things that influence learning. And I know we had a big long list on the previous slide, but the three ones the three most influential factors for learning are things like context alignment. So does the training environment and context match the work environment and context? All right, so that context alignment is so important. The second one is providing authentic practice and feedback. And then the third one is spacing it out over time. Now, so if you do that, so basically what that means is you have to make it as real and as close to the work as possible. Now, work isn't always super fun and engaging, right? Sometimes it's challenging, sometimes it's difficult, especially if you're new to it and you're learning how to do it. And so because so many teams focus on, or kind of like the only capability they have is reaction data, they prioritize it, and they want to make sure that they're having high reaction score, high satisfaction scores. What ends up happening is they end up sacrificing effectiveness for a high CSAT, right? So because they because they're prioritizing, again, higher satisfaction scores, they're not aligning the context very closely. They're not providing as much realistic practice, and they're not maybe spacing it out as much as they should. So instead they're like, how do we make this engaging and fun, right? Because this type of work isn't all that fun. So let's maybe we'll do a game instead, or something like that. And that's just not as effective, right? And so that's kind of the reason behind that, why the correlation is off, is people are sacrificing kind of bells and whistles in games instead of the actual like effective methods, essentially. And so another resource is also by Will Thalheimer, is his book, Performance Focused Learner Surveys. These are just examples of some of the questions that he asks he recommends asking in his surveys. And he says an effective survey does three things. One, it gauges the effectiveness of the training design, right? Is this actually going to be effective in supporting work performance? It enables reporting that's immediately actionable, right? So one of the problems with most traditional Likert scales is the rating, like they get converted, like strongly disagree to strongly agree, they get converted into a number. So you end up with scores like a 3.9 or a 4.2. Well, what are you supposed to do immediately with a 4.2? Like it's hard to know, right? It's hard to know exactly what actions you're supposed to take when you get one of those scores. But when you have an effective survey that asks more distinctive questions like this, I know exactly what to do. If people are telling me that I was either given an inadequate amount of practice or no practice at all, I know exactly how to improve that training right away. And then the last thing that it does too is it influences the design of an effective program, right? So it helps remind the designers of really important considerations and strategies. So again, providing clear expectations too to your enablement team members and the people developing the training. If they see this is how they're going to be evaluated, if they see it's far more superior that they say that they completed tasks and actions or made decisions that they might make in their work, that's superior, but only viewing information and listening to a presenter was like alarming. I'm going, as a training designer, I'm going to make sure that training includes more of those effective strategies for an example. So it's a way in which to influence the design of that effective program. And so I'll wrap up here now. I'll wrap up here a little bit faster. So again, another great resource, from Will Thalheimer. This is his LTEM, is Learning Transfer Evaluation Model. Because the Kirkpatrick sort of is kind of, the details of it are kind of gated behind the certification, there's not as much available or to kind of fill in the gaps, right? But Will does a pretty good job of like helping, can help you fill in those gaps. So this is a model that I've kind of used and adopted a little bit as well, but it's a little bit more comprehensive in how to actually go from attendance all the way up to transfer and tracking the changes, the actual learning progression along the way. So great resource there. Key takeaways here are starting with the end and then deconstruct it down and then continue to deconstruct. So we started with the outcomes. What are the indicators? What are the outputs? What are the behaviors? What are the knowledge and skills? So that is how you do that deconstructing to make sure everything you're doing is anchored to performance, right? Really making sure we anchor all of our efforts to those outputs to assess if our training and learning is effective. Really focus more so on decision making and task competence, and making sure to employ research-backed methods. So I apologize there for the quick wrap up there at the end there, but I think thank you so much everybody for your time. The last research-backed method that we can introduce and that you can participate in is known as action planning. So you see the prompts here on the screen. If you want to double your likelihood that you will apply some of this learning to your job, you'll do this activity. And also, if you want to double the likelihood of your sellers that they'll apply your learning. You can include this prompt at the end of your training, right? So asking people what goal they have for putting this into practice, what situations might arise, and what actions are you specifically going to take. You'll be twice as likely to actually implement it. And with that, I believe I'm supposed to stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Michelle to wrap up.
Yeah, for sure. There are just a couple more comments in here I just want to get through. So Mike had mentioned that his single greatest ROI from a training project came from a brutally hard course with a ton of role play and feedback, and people complained about it. As an aside, I'm sure they did. And then they learned and improved skills and got better results and thanked us later. So there is definitely something in it where, you know, learning is going to happen in the application portion of a training. So that, and the feedback, of course. Let's see. Will's book on performance focused learner surveys has been a game changer. This book has a permanent home in my work backpack. And yeah, just a bunch of thank yous beyond that. So I'm going to join in those thank yous, and thank you all for joining us today. And we do apologize, we went a little bit over time, but I think it was totally worth it. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to throw out a quick reminder. If you aren't yet members of the Revenue Enablement Society or the Enablement Squad, I encourage you, sign up. Membership is free for both. We offer fantastic opportunities to connect with fellow enablers and just gain valuable insights from your peers that are in the field. The other thing we're going to do in the chat is we are going to drop a link in for the Revenue Enablement Society membership program. So this is an excellent way for you to engage further and learn from the experiences of others. The Enablement Squad also does have a separate membership program, and you can find that on the Enablement Squad's website. And that was found in the chat earlier. We can drop it in once more. But Nick, we really, really appreciate such valuable insights around learning and the Kirkpatrick model. We really appreciate you joining us today. And thank you all for your participation. We really look forward to seeing you at future events. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Take care.